Good afternoon. My name is Isan Taylor with I Love the Berg, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our next installment of the History Half Hour. These free history tours are made possible in part by the City of St. Petersburg and the St. Petersburg Downtown Partnership, with a special thanks to the St. Petersburg Museum of History. We're about to get started with today's host, Monica Kyle, who's live in Roser Park. Her husband, John Kyle, is running the presentation for us today, so we're going to get a mix of live footage as well as slides with historic photos, and we hope you enjoy. Have a question during our live tour? Please feel free to use the comment section. We're going to do our best to work in as many questions during the live tour as possible. Once again, thank you for joining us. Be sure to follow I Love the Berg on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as well as subscribing to our newsletter to stay up to date on our next history tour, the latest news, exclusive deals, and all things good in the Berg. Monica, over to you.
Thank you, Isa. I am also joined by Andrew Harlan, who is filming today, and he's got quite the task because there's a lot of trip hazards in this amazing neighborhood of Roser Park, which I think has to be, I know I say this with every tour I do, but this really has to be the most unique neighborhood in St. Pete. And that owes itself really to the unusual topography we have in the area, which is due to Booker Creek, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But before we do, I want to walk up this hill, yes, hill. If you're a runner in St. Pete, you'll probably have been to Roser Park because it's one of the only places you can go to get some hill training. We're going to walk up this hill quickly so that I can show you the backside of the Bayfront Hospital / All Children's Hospital kind of medical complex. And the reason I want to show that is because a lot of the history that we're going to talk about today deals with Roser Park's fight really over the last 30 or 40 years to preserve this unusual neighborhood. So Andrew, you can kind of pan, that's the backside, that large white building is Bayfront Hospital. You can see the parking garage, that's for Johns Hopkins. These are, I think, Johns Hopkins buildings over here, kind of where this security car is coming up now. Right there is where Roser Park Elementary was, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but I want to give that as a point of reference before we do. We're going to walk back down the hill here, Andrew, and watch your step when we do. So Roser Park owes its unusual topography to this creek that runs right through the middle of it called Booker Creek. It's roughly 3 miles long. It starts kind of west of the interstate. John will show you where in a minute. Runs around Tropicana Field, kind of under Central Avenue, and then around Tropicana Field, through Campbell Park, through Roser Park, and then dumps out into Bayboro Harbor, about where USF St. Pete is now. And, you know, over the years, it's cut these deep ravines into the landscape. So you get these hills that you get really nowhere else in St. Pete, and really not that much else in Florida. Andrew, get a shot of the creek, if you will. You can see that the creek has been walled in. I'm going to show you a picture later. They're just poured concrete walls now, but originally they were rusticated block like you see on the retaining wall across the street. Andrew, shoot over there. Those are rusticated block, which is really an early version of a poured concrete block. So you could pour them on site. As we get closer to them, you'll see that they're kind of shaped almost to look like stone. So Roser Park was developed starting around 1913 by a man named Charles Roser. You'll remember St. Pete was founded in 1888. That's when the Orange Belt Railroad came into town at roughly where First Avenue South is today. That was the old train track. And really nothing south of First Avenue South was developed for the first 20 or so years because it was just really swampy, mosquitoes. There was a pioneer settlement down at today's Driftwood, and therefore there was a kind of a path along what is today's 9th Street South, which is the western boundary of Roser Park. So they actually built the Greenwood Cemetery on the edge of Roser Park. We'll see a map of that in a second, in 1890. But other than that, there really wasn't anything going on down here until a man named C.A. Harvey started buying up a lot of land and decided to drain the area and kind of form Bayboro Harbor around 1910. Shortly after that, Charles Roser moved here to be with his parents. He and his wife, Ruth, moved here to be with his retired parents. We're going to hear about his interesting history in a minute. And he began, first he built a hotel on Central Avenue, did a little bit of dabbling in development along Central, but then ended up buying land around here. Now, other sections around what is now Roser Park had been already bought by C.A. Harvey, on the west by a man named Frank Wood, and they were platting out developments. They were kind of staying away from this area because of the unusual topography. But Charles Roser liked that. He was a proponent of what was called the City Beautiful movement, and that advocated for the inclusion of public parks and green spaces to really add to the quality of life. This is following the Industrial Revolution. People are kind of sick of the dirty, smelly, gritty cities, and they're looking for a more bucolic neighborhood in which they can live. It's called the City Beautiful movement. At the same time, there's also the landscape suburb being developed, also a response to the Industrial Revolution. So you have these movements in planning and design that are happening, and Charles Roser is aware of them. And so he wants to test that out, and he finds the perfect place here in what he calls Roser Park. So 1913, he paves 6th Street, which is on the eastern boundary of the neighborhood, in brick, paves it from Central Avenue down here to Roser Park. A streetcar line had opened in 1905 along 9th Street, so now there's some activity. He starts platting the neighborhood and building houses, of which we can see a couple of the best examples directly across the street from me. Roser wanted all the houses to look different. He wanted them to be unique. This one on the left, you know what, John, before I start going into this, why don't you show them a map of where we are, and then we'll come to the pictures we have of this house early.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a picture or a map of downtown St. Petersburg, and I've got Roser Park kind of circled down here. It's this little green ribbon here is where Monica is. Booker Creek runs all the way up here, up to I-275. And actually, at one point, it went all the way up to 30th Avenue. But now that whole area is just like a bunch of different retention ponds. And the route that Monica's going to take today, there aren't any straight lines in Roser Park, really. So she's going to be winding all over the place, a lot of ground to cover. But she's going to be talking about the different parks along the area there and some of the changes that have taken place in the neighborhood. Did you want me to show? Well, I also want to point out Greenwood Cemetery down in the lower left-hand corner, that big green square down there. There's a great 3-minute video that we did on cemeteries that starts in Greenwood. And did you want me to show those 2 pictures of Booker Creek?
Yeah, go ahead. And maybe Isa can pop up at some point during the tour that link to that video that talks more about Greenwood Cemetery.
Yeah.
But go ahead and show, because Andrew's got the camera point. Well, that's Greenwood right there.
Yeah,
that's
there's Greenwood Cemetery. Here's a couple of 3 little girls playing along what was Booker Creek in 1918. And then an example of what Monica's talking about with what Roser was going for is one of these promotional postcards, really right where Monica's standing. There's that Swiss chalet-looking house there, and the lush green landscape and all the topography that Monica's talking about with what Roser was going for with this neighborhood.
And John, I think the next picture is that picture of the Park View house. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so if we flip back over here to me, I don't want to fall into Booker Creek. We could go viral with this video. This is, I believe, the Park View house behind us. So Roser would build these large houses. If he sold you a lot without a house on it, he expected you to build pretty much immediately. He wanted the houses to be different architecturally, and all very grand. Now, the unusual thing, because they're on the banks of this ravine, is that they're 2 and 3 stories facing what is Roser Park Drive. Now, on some of the early maps, we'll see this called Booker Creek Drive, but this is today called Roser Park Drive. They're 2 and 3 stories on this front side, but on the back side where you enter, which we'll see later in the tour, they're only 1 story. It's really neat. So really remember what these houses look like. Andrew, as we walk past this one that looks very much like a Swiss chalet, this brown house, I want you to really focus on how it's got an unusual feature for this time. This would have been about probably 1915 or so this house is built. It's actually got built-in garages, which is a very unusual feature. Most garages are attached in early St. Pete houses, but these ones are actually built right in. And the advertisement, John can read it to you a little later, says that it promotes that it's got chauffeurs' quarters and a garage right in the house. Roser Park's also unusual in that some of the houses have basements, which is something you're not going to find too often in St. Pete, but the houses here are 15 to 30 something feet above sea level, and so they can actually do that. John, did you go ahead and read some of those advertisements?
Yeah,
Yeah.
You're looking right now at the Swiss Chalet, and that was how it was advertised. And obviously, it didn't have those jalousie windows.
Yeah,
It
actually, John,
probably
I'm
looked
glad you said that, because I want to point out for anybody that knows anything or doesn't know anything about historic preservation, windows is always a common topic in historic preservation. And I really want to point out what a difference windows can make. Because if you look up in the top right corner, those are probably the original windows. They've got the unusual kind of X design above a 2-panel pane below. And then down on the left, you can see they've been replaced with like a jalousie window, and over here, just a 6/1. And it really makes a difference in the way the building looks. So preserving the original windows is really key.
Yeah, and the ad, describes what Monica was just saying. First floor, large garage, toilet and chauffeur's quarters. So you could have your chauffeur living down there. Second floor with 5 bedrooms and a bath. Third floor with a living room, dining room, kitchen, fireplaces, gas. That was a big deal back then, to have gas actually running straight to your house. And today, this house is broken into multiple apartments. I think at one point it was a rooming house that accommodated up to 17 residents. There was another ad for a hillside, it was called the Hillside Home, and the caption was truly a rich man's house. So Roser was really trying to attract wealth, or people who wanted to at least feel wealthy by living there. And they named all these houses the Rosemont, and gave them these names. And so by naming a house, it sort of brings cachet to the neighborhood.
Yes, John. And one of the sort of prize houses, Roser really loved the colonial style house. In fact, he built his own house in a colonial style. We'll see that a picture of that house, which is since demolished, in just a moment. But you can see this grand colonial house that sort of overlooks the ravine here. And there's steps up. You can't quite see them there, but Andrew will walk a little farther down. And notice the lush foliage, the tall royal palms, the ferns. Now, when Roser platted the neighborhood, the park that we were standing in when we first started is actually Roser Park. That's the park that he donated as part of the development. And he really kind of, I don't know if clear cut is the right word, but he cleared out a lot of the original foliage and then brought back in these exotic plants like the royal palms. I mean, look at the landscaping look at the great ferns on this house. This house, look at the stairs. I don't know, Andrew, if you can zoom in on those stairs there, but you can see the precarious nature of living on the banks of a ravine, because you get settling, these stairs have collapsed, and I certainly wouldn't want to walk up them. This house is referred to sometimes as the Name That House, because Roser, as part of his promotional techniques, would challenge people to name. Can you still hear me, John?
Sure can.
Okay, sorry. To name the house. I think this one ended up with the name of Glenview, if I remember correctly. But you can see this one's been beautifully restored and is a single family home again. John, you mentioned that the Swiss Chalet house, we'll walk this way. And actually, Andrew, as we do, make sure you get a good look at this beautiful tree here. The Swiss Chalet house and the one next to it that we first saw, that green one, they were broken up, as you said, at least by the 30s, which makes sense from what we know about St. Pete history. During the Depression, people are breaking up their single family homes and renting out rooms, basically to make a little money, to make any income. A lot of people have invested in real estate during the 1920s boom, which is what, Roser is doing here. Look at this. This is unusual. In Roser Park, you don't see that many Mediterranean revival style. I don't know if you can see it close up on there, but it's got that stucco that's kind of added in a decorative fashion that you often see in Mediterranean revival style homes. We're going to walk across this wooden bridge. And actually, before we do, I'll get Andrew to turn to the right and shoot these. Oh, hi. Sorry. Shoot these stairs that Roser actually poured in place. A lot of the stairs that he put into the neighborhood. He also built these. He built 2 or 3 cement bridges. We'll cross one of those in a minute, and then 3 wooden bridges. Now, this is not an original bridge. John will show you a picture later of the original footbridge that was here that had more of an arched railing and kind of these twisted wooden rails. But he built all of this along the creek edge. We're just going to take a quick shot up Prospect Court because I want to show the side of this orange house.
Monica, right now I've got a side-by-side picture showing that rusticated block down
Oh,
inside
okay, cool.
the creek. Shows what
Right.
what it looked like originally. There's
And it
actually a
it
couple
didn't
of
hold
them.
up very well.
No.
So they had to redo that. But look at this hill. I have run this hill for exercise, and even now it's making me huff and puff a little bit. You can see, so here, look, you can see the kind of almost one-story entrance to this house. Andrew, I also want you to note this dead end sign. You can see this Prospect Court dead ends here, just because we're going to point that out later as a point of reference as to where we are. And when Andrew turns back, you can see, what a great, you can see why this is called Prospect Court. I mean, what a great prospect you've got in front of you. What a great view. We are going to cross over and start heading up into the part of Roser Park that really brought a lot of attention to it in the early, really starting in the early 70s. So when Roser designed this neighborhood, it went all the way up to about 6th Avenue South, what we think of today as the Bayfront and or All Children's Hospital campus. John, can you pull up that the Sanborn map that shows Roser's house and Augusta Memorial? So Charles Roser actually built his house on the north side of the creek. And John, what I'm trying to get to is to give them some perspective on where his house was versus where we are now in reference to the creek. So Charles Roser built a grand colonial style house at 7th Avenue and 7th Street. Across the street from him was the Augusta, what was at that point called Augusta Memorial Hospital. It had started in 1906 as the St. Pete Sanitarium, more kind of in downtown proper. Then around 1910 or so, they moved it to the location at 7th and 7th. They then built a new, it was a kind of a bungalow style hospital. They named it Augusta Memorial after the mother of Edwin Tomlinson, a big city leader, donor. Later, he had kind of a falling out with the hospital and told him he didn't want to call it after his mom anymore. So they changed the name to City Hospital and then to Mound Park Hospital, because across the street from the hospital itself was a large Indian mound. So at one point, and Andrew, John, make it small again so Andrew can show the creek here. And you can see how high the banks are at this point. I mean, that's got to be at least, I'm really bad with measurements, but that's got to be at least 20 feet, don't you think? And then you can see that how the hills.
20, yeah.
What? Yeah, it's tall. So along this creek, Native Americans had made their homes as well. So at one point, there was at least 7 Indian mounds along the banks of Booker Creek. Most of those, 6 of those were gone by 1910. But the last one, probably the most famous, well-known Indian mound in St. Pete, that is no longer standing anyway, didn't get demolished until 1954. And it was just north of where I'm standing right now. And after Tomlinson said he didn't want the hospital named after his mother, they changed the name to City Hospital. I guess they didn't think that was a good enough name. So then they called it Mound Park Hospital. And John, if you can show the pictures of, I'm going to come around and see what you've got up.
Yeah, I've got the mounds up right now.
There's the mounds. Okay, go back to the one with the, and go to the next slide. And there's the hospital itself. Now that building is still standing. Eventually they take down around 1954, they take down this mound. Go to the next slide, John. You can see the building, the white building still there. That's the original Mound Park Hospital, but now they've added on. You can see the buildings to the right of it. And go on, John, to the picture. So I took this picture yesterday. So that's the original Mound Park Hospital. And go to the next one, John, and you can see. And that's the west entrance to Bayfront Hospital. So if you've been to that west entrance to Bayfront Hospital, if you look to your left, you're going to see the original Mound Park Hospital. Now, John, go back to the Sanborn map that shows, that's the one. Okay, yep. So that pink on the left, the Sanborn map on the left is an early insurance map from 1923. The pink square kind of at the top is Augusta Memorial Hospital. If you look to the right of it, you'll see it says Mound Park, and then there's a circle. That was the shell mound. Below the pink hospital, there's a blue building, and then there's a yellow building, and that says Nurses Home. The nurses' home was built by Roser. He realized they needed a place for the nurses to live. He donated the land and actually spent the money himself, $30,000, to build the house. They furnished it. They even brought the silverware and the linens. Across the street from that, so south of that, below that kind of catty corner, that's where Charles Roser's house was. So, John, show the picture, if you would, of Charles Roser's house so we can see what was there. Okay, so that was the house that was basically, if you go to the west entrance of Bayfront Hospital, it was just about in that vicinity, this huge, large colonial style house that was later also converted to nurses housing and then demolished at some point. I couldn't quite get an exact year on when it was demolished, but it's definitely not there anymore. So you can see how, and Andrew, turn this way if you will, you can see how the growth, and John, actually, before you make me big, show that last Sanborn map that shows all the houses that were in that vicinity of Charles Roser's house.
Yeah. So this map, I've got it up there, and then you can see below where the mound was. And Lisa told me that you can't see my cursor, but basically almost every house in the top half of the middle third of this map is now gone. And that big field where Monica was standing at the very beginning of the tour is where those houses stood. And there used to be a playground there. I haven't been able to see that the hospital's ever put a building there, but I can't rule it out.
Okay, so all of that we're talking about is just up 8th Avenue South here. So if we kept walking up here, we would basically come out where I started when I walked up the hill and showed that big field. These houses, and Andrew, I want you to focus on this one in particular. This was known as the Green House after the doctor that first lived there, Thaddeus Green. This was this and probably the properties next to it had all been bought up by Bayfront Hospital. This area had entered a period of decline, like much of St. Petersburg had in the 60s and 70s. And Bayfront, and we'll move here in a second to get away from that sound. Bayfront had bought up a lot of the property, really thinking nobody wanted it. Vagrants were living in the house. There's a lot of drug activity in this area. And eventually in the 70s, they're preparing to demolish this. And the people in the neighborhood start to go, you know what, hang on a minute. We're losing too much of this neighborhood. We're going to lose what makes us special. So they really fight Bayfront on this. After quite a bit of back and forth, the house itself is eventually preserved. We're going to walk up here. And it really sparked that, along with the building of the 8th Street connector, which you can just see it here. Can you see that, John, on the screen? Okay, yep. So that bridge there is 8th Street. That's called the 8th Street connector. And I'm going to come back to that. But you'll notice that Roser Park Drive continues underneath the 8th Street connector.
Stay right there for a second, Mon. I want Lisa to throw up this other slide side by side so you can see the homes that used to stand really kind of right exactly where you're standing. So we have a side by side with a postcard that was taken there.
Well, and I'll go ahead and talk about the 8th Street connector now because these houses play into it. So 1970s, the interstate system is expanding. They're going to bring it through St. Petersburg. They're going to bring I-75 through St. Petersburg. And some forward-thinking people can see what's going to, it was heralded as it was going to save the city. It was going to bring it out of its doldrums. Some people could see, though, the city planning sort of nightmares that were going to come along with this. As they make the feeders off of 75 into downtown, they think this is going to create a lot of traffic. So we need to create one-way streets in and out of downtown in order to facilitate these people getting off of the interstate. They decide to make MLK 9th Street one-way going south and 8th Street as one-way going north. As part of this, where they turn into one-way streets, they've got to connect them. They've got to connect 8th Street to 9th Street so that if you were going one way, if you were going north on 9th Street, you could connect to 8th Street to begin going north that way. So they called it the 8th Street Connector. And they said they got to run it right through Roser Park, which at that time has become pretty dilapidated. They think nobody's going to care. Well, it turns out people do care. The neighborhood does care. And they really begin to fight this 8th Street Connector. And it galvanizes the neighborhood because they realize Bayfront's encroaching from the north and the east. And now we've got the 8th Street Connector. I'm going to walk up. So this is quite a fight. And it ran really through the 70s into the 80s. Not until 1987 is Roser Park. In 1985, the city creates its first historic preservation ordinance. And that allows for the creation of local historic districts. If your neighborhood is designated as a local historic district, it then offers some protection against demolition. A demolition has to come before the city for a certificate of appropriateness. So Roser Park ends up becoming the first local historic district in 1987. But well before that is the fight over these couple of houses, which along with the ones John said were demolished for the 8th Street Connector, these were supposed to go down too. This one in particular caught a lot of people's attention. This was known as the Herman Dan House. Dan was a early city leader, moved here, married the daughter of a well-known St. Pete resident, went into the building industry, was the exclusive importer of hollow tiles, which were essentially the precursor to cement blocks. So they were the interior foundation of a home. Always covered over in stucco though. So you don't see hollow tiles in the way that you'll see cement block homes today. So there was quite a fight over this house. And eventually, like the greenhouse, in both of those circumstances, Bayfront and the city were able to, it's a complicated story, but able to come up with a kind of auction system. And long story short, these houses are saved. But I want to just quickly peek around the corner. And actually across the street, Andrew, you can see is the parking garage, one of the parking garages for Bayfront, and a big Bayfront building there. And you can see, if we come around the corner here, how the 8th Street Connector comes right out. You can see why they wanted to take this home. They took the houses across the street there. We're going to go just quickly back down so you can kind of see. And the city's argument was, you know, if you're on the street in Roser Park, on Roser Park Drive, it's really not that disruptive, which arguably might be true. It's kind of peaceful down underneath the 8th Street Connector, but it did take out all of those houses. It left a few kind of, you know, randomly placed along this now very, very busy street. And in hindsight, it could be very frustrating reading these articles from, you know, the 70s, knowing what we know today, where there's a lot of talk of making 8th and 9th Street back to 2 ways again, and maybe taking out the I-75 feeders into downtown. So these arguments that people like John Shue and Peter Belmont, my friend and hero, were making in the 70s, 80s, you can really see that they came true. They didn't really need to build this 8th Street Connector. We probably could have lived without it. And arguably, it wrecked this end of Roser Park. We're going to walk just a little bit down into here. I won't go all the way up to 9th Street, but I want you to just get a sense of what it looked like. Hello. How's it going? Good, thanks. So John, on my left here, you can still see this is interesting because here's original rusticated block, and then on top of it, they've put just regular cement concrete blocks. And I'm just going to go.
I'm going to have Isa put up a side-by-side of a couple of the houses that were torn down.
That were basically probably right about where I'm standing.
Yeah.
In this vicinity.
Yeah.
So here's the 8th Street Connector. You can see again, the road goes pretty steeply up. You know what? Actually, let's walk a little bit farther down so that you can see so one of the benefits of having a local historic district, in addition to the certificate of appropriateness process, that basically it doesn't exclude demolition. It makes you pause and say, okay, give us a really good reason that we want to demolish this important part of our history. And if you can make that argument, you can get a demolition permit. And it has happened many times. I think there's maybe 20 houses that have gone down in Roser Park.
Having a little bit of a lag
Yeah.
here. We're going to get Monica back in a second. Thank you for your patience.
She's frozen in time.
Live shows are fun.
While Monica is broken up, I've got this slide up with these two white houses, and the house in the background we're going to talk about in a minute is known as the Kirby House, and it has a very interesting history.
Not connected.
Is Monica back? Oh, she's back. Can you see her, Isa?
I'm back. Okay, John. Before you,
a little
okay,
frozen,
good.
but I can hear you. So let's run with it.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can.
So I just wanted to point. Okay, we're standing, and actually, Andrew, if you turn around real quick, we're standing in Woodbrook Park. So north of 9th Street was developed by a man named Frank Wood, and he donated this piece of land for. The other street of 9th Street there is the Brookside Home for Girls. That was originally a home for unwed mothers. They would tell them to get on the train and get off when it stopped and go walk to the Florence Crittenden Home for Unwed Mothers. But this house here, now there would have been something else here originally. You can see the stairs that were built here, the retaining walls. This house was built in 2006. And I don't know how much you lost, John, we'll walk back this way. But in addition to the certificate of appropriateness process that helps prevent demolition in a historic district, you also have to have new construction proved that it fits the neighborhood. So that one was built in 2006. I actually was in it once on a tour of homes.
Oh, we're cutting out again.
Yeah. I think the 8th Street connector is not great. Not great for cell service.
Not great for connecting.
But it's a good segue into the next part that I was going to talk about, because the part that Monica is walking past right now used to be the site of a home that was known as the Kirby House. So we've got Monica back now. Can I talk about the Kirby House now, Mon?
Yeah, go for it. That's perfect. I'm going to cut in on the 8th Street stairs, but that's in a minute. Go ahead.
So right up the hill is where that house sat. Today, that house sits in North Florida. It was actually placed on a barge and floated up through the Gulf, under the Skyway, through the Gulf, and up to North Florida, up the Swanee River, to a place near Branford, Florida, called Troy Springs. It's called the Kirby House because it was owned by Ruth Kirby. And Ruth Kirby was a very familiar name at that time. She was the secretary and girlfriend of the late Ed C. Wright, who at one point was the largest landowner and richest man in Pinellas County. After he died, she was tasked with divesting his land holdings and executor of his estate. This was the first house. Yes.
John, pause for 1 second so I can show where we're. So we're back on Roser Park Drive.
Yeah.
And this is one of the coolest parts of the Roser Park neighborhood. They have these. It reminds me of being a kid again. And I found here, Andrew, get this sign. There's a street sign for the stairs. It says 2/8th Street. And then we're going to go up these stairs, which are city-owned stairs. And it makes me feel like being a kid again. Like I found like a secret passage. I love them. And then, Andrew, as we go up, I want you to show the houses on either side because they're beautiful and they overlook the creek. And John, as we walk down to 10th, you go ahead and keep telling the story about the Kirby.
Yeah, so Ruth Kirby had the funds in order to save her house from the 8th Street connector, and she had some land up in North Florida that used to belong to Ed Wright because he owned land all over the state, and she and her sister liked to spend time up there, so they said, let's take our house and move it up there. And lo and behold, I looked on the Lafayette, that's how you say it, up in North Florida. The Lafayette County Property Appraiser still lists this house. It actually listed as built in 1937, but we know it's older than that. I think that's the year that Ruth Kirby's family bought the house. But the house is still there. They have an easement that allows them to use Troy Springs State Park in order to get to the property, because she donated the land that is Troy Springs State Park and Ruth Kirby Gilchrist Blue Springs State Park. So there's two Blue Springs State Park. There's one up by past Orlando, And then there's Ruth Kirby Gilchrist Blue Spring State Park, which is up
Okay.
in Lafayette County, or actually not Lafayette County, one of the other counties up there. So just a really fascinating thing that we could, in 1976, I think it was, stick a house on a barge and move it up the Swanee River, that it made financial sense to someone. And it's there. And I do plan to go up there and get a picture of that house one day.
Oh, I know this is going to be on one of our road trips. John, make me big real quick. I just want to show the dead end sign that's at the end of Prospect Court. That's where we were earlier. So now we've come up the 8th Street stairs, and we're going to come on to 10th Avenue. If you're able, John, show that historic district, the map of the boundaries of the local historic district. So when they were
there we go,
designing, what was going to be in and out of the boundaries of the local historic district, they actually incorporated a couple of other developments that weren't originally part of Roser's, and it basically ended along 10th Avenue. These 3 houses here were not originally included, and they asked later, they petitioned later, sometime at 2006, 2008, something like that, to be added in because they wanted the benefits, the tax benefits that can accrue to you. This house in particular took advantage of ad valorem tax exemptions to open up their porch. You can see they have a preservation award winner flag hanging in their window. And then this house, which is 1913, really before Roser even began his development, they believe is the earliest home in Roser Park. And you can see its big wide porch, lots of windows, things that are going to facilitate airflow before we have air conditioning. So John,
and the original tin roof.
Rusted.
Right.
They don't know what we're talking about. It's a song. Okay, so we're on 10th Avenue. We're going to walk down. We're going to take another set of stairs back, but we're going to be seeing the backside of some of those houses that we saw from Roser Park Drive. John, as we walk, Andrew, I'm going to have you just kind of point out or show some of the different houses as we're walking along. I'm going to point out a couple of new construction. You can really tell with the new construction, but they've done a nice job and they've made it fit in. John, talk a little bit about real estate, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about Charles Roser himself.
Yeah, I found it was interesting. An ad for that Swiss chalet house way back in the 20s listed it for $11,000 up for sale, but the guy said it was worth 17. In the 90s, when Roser Park was starting to come out of its sort of downturn, you could still get back there
here.
And you could still get in there and get a house for, I think the cheapest house was $10,000. I think they went up to about $100,000, but we're talking 96, a house for under $100,000 in Roser Park. In 2002, the average house purchase price in Roser Park is $96,000. In 2005, 3 years later, it jumps up to $305,000. Of course, there was a little bubble there after 2005, but today, a house that's been remodeled or even, modestly redone a few years ago, you're talking easily $600,000 or $700,000, more likely $800,000 to $1 million. But there's still a lot of houses in there that haven't been completely redone. When you go through some of the other neighborhoods in St. Pete, you go to Snell Isle and Northeast, even Uptown, you see a lot of work being done. Roser Park still has a lot of the houses that haven't they've had owners for a long time. So.
And we're standing actually at the backside now of that large colonial house that we saw from Roser Park Drive. But look it's still impressive from this side. It's still got the columns, but you can see how it's not nearly as grand from the front side as it is from the back. This house and the houses next to it that we saw from Roser Park, like the Swiss Chalet house, they really haven't sold in 30 years. The gentleman that lives in that house has been one of the big activists, wrote all the historic signs in the neighborhood. That's my dog. Stop it, Echo. Oh, I shouldn't say his name. I can hear Echo barking in the background. So these houses along here, they've really been held by the same people for a long time. Now we're coming up on the back side of the Swiss Chalet house, which is just crazy when you see it from the front or the back, whichever side you want to call this, how different it looks. And Andrew, I don't even know if you want to, you might want to go across the street to get a good perspective on This is just the one story. This is the one that was 3 stories with the garage underneath. John, you
Yeah,
probably have me muted.
and
Um,
these were
Go ahead.
all these are all still apartments, multiple
Right,
units. Same
right.
owners since the 90s.
And here's that other kind of Greenwood the Park view house. Again, I mean, this is really cool looking. And look at that, still got its windows that swing out. They've got their original windows. Good job. All right, we're going to go down another set of hidden stairs here. These ones are a little bit precarious, so be careful, Andrew. But I always feel like a kid in a, like when we went, what was that house we went to in Salem, John, where they had the
Oh
secret
yeah, the Herman
passages?
Melville house, wasn't it?
No,
Oh
not
no,
Herman
no, no.
Melville.
That was the Seven Green Gable or
House
Green
of Seven Gables.
Alpha Seven Gable. Seven Green. I don't know how many Gables.
It reminds me
Yeah,
of the
one of those.
stairwells in the House of Seven Gables, but it feels like
Yeah.
you're a kid. So I hope if anything, we've shown you anything today, you've learned where these stairs are, and so you can't park in front of them. So there's these no parking signs. We're gonna walk up 6th Street and look at one last house, John, and then we'll be
Yeah.
done. But we would be remiss as we walk through Roser Park to not talk about Charles Roser himself, who was a very interesting person. His niece said of him, he was a very quiet man, very small, reserved. He was a vegetarian in a time when, that was really not a very common thing. And it makes you wonder if, it tells you a little bit about the kind of person that he was. He wanted to, be a part of the environment. He was a hippie before that was a thing. He made his money because at one point he was rumored to arguably be the richest person in St. Petersburg from a candy and cookie. John, you tell the story.
Yeah, well, the story that has been often told and retold is that Roser invented the fig Newton and sold it to Nabisco for $1 million. And that's a bit of a tall tale. In fact, when Nabisco celebrated the 100th anniversary of the fig Newton back in like 2002 or something like that, they didn't know who Roser was. And there's a reason for that. Roser did have a cake and cookie factory in Kenton, Ohio. The real story behind Roser and the fig Newton is that he invented the fig filling, and he sold that filling recipe to a place called Kennedy Biscuit outside of Boston, Massachusetts. Kennedy Biscuit had a habit of naming their cookies after different towns in the area, and they chose Newton, Massachusetts. The filling was paired with a cookie that was produced by a machine that a guy named John Mitchell invented. And Mitchell invented this machine that could make these cookies, these sort of filled cookies, and they named it the Newton. Nabisco comes in and buys Kennedy Biscuit, and they name it the Fig Newton, which is why Nabisco never heard of Roser, because Nabisco didn't give Roser $1 million. $1 million back then would have been about 25 million today. And if you think you can get $25 million for a cookie recipe, I think you'd be doing well. Roser sold a portion of his share of his cake factory to another man. His father had a cheese and dairy operation up there. They had money. They moved real estate. He gathered his money from a number of different ways. He did not sell the Fig Newton idea to Nabisco for $1 million.
Well, but I still think we can say he invented the fig Newton, because if he made the filling, then that's what makes it special. I'm going with it. I'm sticking with it, John.
Yeah. Well, the Mitchell people want to say that it's the shape of the cookie that makes it a Newton, Monica.
No, it's a fig. It's a fig Newton. So speaking of Newton, if anybody's a runner, the Boston Marathon is famous for these killer hills between miles, like, I don't know, 16 and 21 or something like that. Those are the Newton Hills. And so when I read that it was named after Newton, Massachusetts, I'm like, that's where Heartbreak Hill is in the Boston Marathon. So if you're a runner, there's all kinds of running connections with Roser Park, the Fig Newton, the hills where you can train. I'm going to finish here in front of what is known as the Bradshaw Mansion. It's kind of one of the grand showpieces of Roser Park today, one of the houses that's actually been really spectacularly redone. I went to a fundraiser here once many years ago. It's beautiful inside. It was built by Roser for Mayor James Bradshaw, who was the mayor for 3 years in like the 1915, 1916. John, there's a picture of him well, with a crowd of people, he oversaw the expansion of Central Avenue out past 9th Street. So that was a big deal when they were paving it out past 9th Street. So he lived here for just a year. His daughter was the only graduating senior in 1902 when the new St. Pete High School building was built. So they were gone. And then some years after that, it had another great story, which a lot of this information I want to actually, Andrew, let's come around here because I want to show these fabulous historic signs they have in Roser Park that are filled with, and I usually get skeptical of these things because I always feel like people are going to get them wrong. These signs are actually the most accurate historic marker signs I think I've ever seen. They're really well done, and they're, I think, written by the gentleman that lived in that big house with the columns. But they're here, and there's like 23 of them, I think. So I had never heard the story of the Zilch house. I knew Mayor Bradshaw lived in this house. And Andrew, get a shot of it from this side too, because it's grand from both sides. Prior to World War II, there was a group of young bachelors who in 1935, they started with 4 of them, and they all decided they were going to live together, share resources and get a nice house and a cook. And they decided to call themselves the Zilch Bachelors because they wanted to be able to say, we're the last name in the phone book. You can find, if you meet a girl, you can tell her to call you by finding the Zilch last name in the phone book. Just go to the last name in the phone book. Well, eventually they moved from house to house, and they ended up here in the years prior to World War II. This is the last house that they had. The Zilch Bachelors grew. If you got married, you were out, to like 30 people at one point. And they, it was different people at different times, but they all would live together, and they always had a cook. Eventually they had to change their spelling from Z-I-L-C-H to Z-Y-L-C-H because a Zurich moved into St. Petersburg, and he got the last spot in the phone book, so they changed it to Z-Y-L-C-H. So after the Zilch Bachelors moved out at the start of World War II, the house, like many others in the Roser Park area, really entered a period of decline. It was purchased in 2002 by a couple who lovingly restored it. They also bought a lot of the property around here, demolished subpar homes, and built a lot of new construction. So this is kind of the, and actually, John, you'd have to look at the boundary of I'm not sure if this is in the historic district or not, but it's really the showpiece house of Roser Park. It's along Ingleside Avenue. And if you follow 6th Street down, and we're just 2 streets off of 4th Street here, but it's this enclave that I think so few people know about in Roser Park. And it's really a great story of survival because it was this fabulous, wealthy enclave that is really, through kind of gritting its teeth and through a lot of hard work and advocacy by neighborhood residents and other advocates in the city, has managed to hang on. And I would strongly encourage you to, and actually, John, I think there was a picture of the Zilch Bachelors before I close out.
Yeah, I had that up there, yeah.
So, but I would strongly encourage you to come down, see the Mayor Bradshaw house, see the houses along Roser Park, and watch your step. Thank you for joining us. Thanks, Andrew, Isa, and John, and we will see you next time.